In a moving, stirring both controversy and concern, Florida Republicans have introduced a bill that could drastically alter the legal landscape for LGBTQ plus individuals. The proposed legislation aims to criminalize what in terms as lewd or lascivious grooming, thrusting it into the realm of second-degree felonies punishable by hefty fines and extensive prison sentences. Spearheaded by Republicans Taylor Yarosi and Douglas Bankson, the bill takes a hardline stance against any communication perceived as promoting sexual activity to minors. However, critics argue that the bill's broad language could disproportionately target LGBTQ plus content and performances, infringing on free expression and potentially censoring vital discussions. With LGBTQ plus advocates bracing for yet another legislative session marked by potential discrimination, the bill's fate remains uncertain amidst an ongoing battle between Florida's conservative leadership and LGBT plus right activists. This story is from the National Review, published on January 11, 2024. Okay, Eli, I got some shit to say, but I'm going to pass it over to you.
So we can get her back
give
around
opinions. Yeah, I gotta take a breather. Okay, go.
So I first saw the article title and I'm like, hold on, like we already knew that grooming is not a good thing to do, right? Like, but of course, the bill isn't about actually protecting anybody. It's about criminalizing groups of people for existing. So Representative Taylor Yarosi decries drag shows specifically, and probably even anything seen as remotely not straight as confusing for young kids, as if children are born knowing the rules of heteronormative society. And that's always been such a strange concept to me, that they assume children are going to be confused by things like this.
You know, I was just thinking, just because you're confused doesn't mean your children are.
Yeah. Kids are smart. They learn quick. So, but as you look at the language of the bill, it seems like just acknowledging to a person younger than 16 that sex exists.
Say this is so.
Don't teach children about having sex. Why would you ever do that? So this would require abstinence-only education in Florida schools, which is already the case in Florida. I looked up states that have abstinence-only education, and in Florida is one of the states that stresses teaching abstinence. But we all know that that is not an effective tool for preventing pregnancy or actually teaching kids about how to be responsible. Out of the 10 states with the highest birth rate among people age 15 to 19 who can get pregnant, 5 of those states either don't require sex education in any way at all or require abstinence-focused education. Surprising everyone, Florida is actually not in that top 10 list. They come in at number 23 with 15.4 births per 15.2 births per 1,000 pregnancy-capable teenagers, just under the national average of 15.4. Just as a side note. But I was thinking about this, and I remember hearing on an episode several months ago, and I'm pretty sure, Cross-Examiner, you were the one that said it, turnabout is fair play. And that was an article. That
sounds like something you would say.
Yeah, an article about Florida once again, because we cover that a lot on this show, covered it last time I was on. But there are descriptions in the Bible of sex, of things that would now be considered illegal. For example, the story of Lot and his daughters. That would be considered illegal today. And the bill specifies, encouraging minors younger than 16 to engage in illegal sex acts. That is felonious. So I wonder if any of these, the Christian nationalist, lawmakers in Florida are going to consider that before they really lean in hard on this bill. Sorry, Cross-Examiner, what do you have to?
Well, I hadn't thought of applying it to the Bible, but I think you're right. So there's two issues with this particular thing. I'm gonna go to town a little bit on this. My background is in the law, so I read the bill. They have changed the bill since this article was written. So that's the first story, is somewhere, and it only took about 8 or 9 days since the bill was introduced between that time and the amendment, that people realize they really screwed up. But let's talk about the bill that was introduced, because it highlights the ineptitude of state legislators. They generally are not very good at writing laws. They don't understand how to create sentences that have good definitions and good structure, and define activity that they want to make illegal, and excludes activity that they want to remain legal. And sometimes that's on purpose. They just want to get up and say, I introduced this bill that will get rid of those, drag queens, to their constituents. And that's true. They introduced it. And then after the hubbub dies down, they go to amend it to make it constitutional. The first bill, and this is what the highlights, it would make it a felony for a person to engage in the process of preparing or encouraging a child, whatever that means, a process of preparing or encouraging a child to engage in sexual activity, either through overtly sexually themed communication with the child, whatever that means, or in conduct with or observed by the child, right? So it would be a felony for someone to teach the child what sex was, because that would be the process of preparing a child to engage in sexual activity through overtly sexually themed communication. That would be a felony. I have a book here that I have given to my kids, and on the cover it says over 2 million copies sold. This is called Where Did I Come From? It teaches kids the birds and the bees in a very good way, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's a clause at the end that says you can't do this without permission of the child's parent or legal guardian. That's when it becomes illegal. If the parent does this, you're okay. So I'm okay to give this to my kid, but it leaves open, like, what if I didn't tell my wife? That parent didn't give permission. So I would be a felon maybe if I gave this to my child and didn't tell my wife, forgot to, or more specifically, the school nurse gives this to somebody, or information about birth control or anything like that without telling the parent. It would be a felony under this old version. Now, the new version, they changed it. So it's basically criminalizing that which is already criminal, which is, again, watering it down to be nothing. Now and by the way, they didn't exclude anybody who was under 18. So if you were 16 hitting on your boyfriend or your girlfriend in a communicative way, you were a felon now under that old bill. Right? So the new bill says a person who is 18 years or older who engages a pattern of, not a process of, they change that. And then they describe written, verbal, electronic communication that demonstrates sexual conduct or sexual incitement. And they refer to all of the sex crimes acts to get their definitions. For the directed at a person who's less than 16 years of age, they're trying to get the 17s and 18-year-olds from dating each other. That's okay. For the purpose of preparing, encouraging, or enticing such a person to engage in any unlawful sexual activity. They added all of that stuff. So now they're basically saying, if you do stuff sexually to get a kid to participate in unlawful sexual activity, that's a crime. Well, it already was a crime. So they introduced a bill that was targeting drag shows. They accidentally would criminalize probably their own behavior in educating their kids or their neighbors' kids or a school that's educating kids. And then quietly, without any press, watered it down to basically, this is going to be criminalizing that which was already criminal, which is exactly what the GOP constantly rails about. Why do we have so many laws? Why do we have so many regulations? We don't need all this stuff. Exactly. This is a good example.
You mean this was a nothing burger?
Oh,
This is a silly nothing burger?
It is now.
It is now, but at the time, like when it came out, like, and I'll get to that, but I was very pissed off.
If I gave this book to my neighbor's kid, or the school nurse gave this book to my kid in Florida, under the original bill without my permission, like not like against my will, but just not telling me, forgetting to tell me, or just having it at the library. If the librarian gave it to them, it would not just be illegal or not be a civil offense. It would have been a felony. And these legislators put these laws out, and occasionally they slip through because nobody notices, and the original language stays in, and they go in because they're inept, or they want, as we were talking in an earlier segment with Eli, they want this to become a Christian nation. So Kelly, you were applauding us. I didn't mean to take up so much time, but
you're fine. It was actually very self-centered. I was applauding myself because I was thinking along the same lines as you were, and I thought if I was doing that, that was pretty smart of me. So
pat yourself on the back, Kelly. Pat yourself on the back.
I was clapping for myself. So like my notes start out with, let's put forth a scenario, and this would have been under the old version of the bill. Yeah. My 16-year-old granddaughter comes to me for advice. She's her mother, my daughter's on vacation. Grandma lives in a different state. She's having trouble urinating. She's never experienced anything like it before. And after 15, 20 minutes of conversation, I become concerned that, she might have an STD. So I volunteer to drive over to her house, pick her up, take her to the doctor. Along the way, I tell her not to worry about it. Most of these can be cured easily. Just you should let all your sex partners know. Nobody's going to pass judgment, and nobody's going to tell you can't have sex anymore. Now, under that law, I could have gone to jail for 30 years.
Yes, you would have been, and you would have engaged in the process of preparing a child, somebody under 18, to engage in sexual activity through overtly sexually themed communication. You talked to her about sex. You were preparing her to have sex safely, but that they don't say safely or anything like that. You would have been a felon. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's I as soon as I saw this law, I was like, this is a thing that they keep doing. A lot of these anti-woke crusaders, they make these bills with language that is so overly broad, like the Protection of Child Act that Florida legislator passed in May 2023. And it just the laws can't be implemented. I'm having a hard time. Toy boat. Okay, I'm good now. Now that law was eventually struck down because they make these laws with this overly broad language that you can't pin down exactly what it is that they're supposed to actually be legislating about.
You're absolutely right. That's something I was going to bring up when you mentioned that, is the first bill would have been unconstitutional due to vagueness. Mm-hmm. Like that's a standard that the court says you can't have a law that's vague. You can't criminalize behavior and just be like, you're not allowed to do stuff that's yucky, and that can't be a law because that's too vague.
Yeah, and it seems like it's almost like a strategy, like you were saying. There's this big fanfare. We put this bill in. We're gonna pass. Oh, we're gonna get.
And
we're
those
gonna get
liberals
rid of these.
Voted against it.
Right, and then when the bill dies 6 months later because it's not constitutional, there's no fanfare. Nobody. Right. And then when it's time for re-election, I introduce that bill when it's time to get reelected. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Helen.
So I do want to point out, like, the way that I'm going to do this little quote that Yarosi said, which this seems so fucking silly to me. All ages welcome should be a crime in Florida for these types of events, and under 5-year-old free should be a felony. One of the bill sponsors, Republican Yarosi, tweeted in 2022 referencing a drag performance. I've been saying this publicly while campaigning over the past year. There's nothing okay about any of this evil grooming and confusing of young kids. #child abuse. Now, I got problems with these mofos because, like we were talking about under the previous language of the law, that was very broad strokes. And this is what happened with the book bans that happened happened in Florida, is that the language was so broad that any mention of what might cause a parent to make it like a stink eye about, because there's no way to tell what's going to offend somebody. Like I might find something very offensive where another person may not. And I can go to the school board and be like, hey, I don't like this. This is making me feel bad. Please, and I don't want kids to read it. Please get rid of it. And the school's like, okay. because that's the world we live in right now. And you have to think about like imagine if it's Halloween and you dress up in drag as a character. Like I did a come as your favorite queer person party, a couple of years ago for Halloween. And is that illegal because there were minors present? Like the way this was worded, what's the line? And I am glad that people are like, no, we can't really do this. But I think it's rhetoric. It's like we're going to make a big stink of liberals, and the radical left and blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool.
Got to stand up to the woke agenda.
The woke agenda, which is basically can we just all treat people like human beings and let them have equal rights? That'd be great. Thank you. For some reason, they always make it about children. But the thing is, though, there's queer kids. I knew I was queer when I was 7 years old. It was confirmed when I was 15, but I was 7. And also, I would like to point out that I gave my kids a better sex education than the Florida school system. My kids have told me that, you were much better at teaching me about sex than the Florida school system. So, and those are I think there has to be a combination of education and home safety and balance. There's always been this tandem between the two, between schools and the state and, people's private wants and, desires. And we've always kind of understood this, but lately it's saying well, if I find something icky, I'm going to make a stink about it and hopefully somebody makes a law. And I know that this didn't pass, and we're just going to make things that were already bad. Okay, yes, we all agree that, people shouldn't be weird around kids because it's gross. Don't do that, people. But also, you can say boys have penises, girls have vaginas, and tell her, we can have those conversations about sex, and then we can talk about gender identity and all that sort of thing. But those are normal conversations we should be having with kids so they can understand that guess what? Your genitals don't make your personality who you are as a person. Same with your sexuality, same as being a person in the world. So,
Helen, you naive, sweet summer child.
I know, I'm a sweet little summer child. Sorry, I'm a queer ass, uppity woman. Okay.
There's a prong in the law that we didn't talk about that covers what your question actually, and it covers what Eli was talking about this being a law designed to criminalize people existing. So one of the prongs was, again, the first version of the bill, a person who engages in the process of preparing a child to engage in sexual activity through overtly sexually themed communication. That's one, or in conduct observed by the child. So did you engage in a process of preparing a child to engage in sexual activity in conduct by using conduct that a child observed? So that's where they're going after that generic thing. Oh, you went to a drag show. We're going to call that preparing or encouraging a child to engage in sexual activity because you observed a drag show. And that says more about the GOP than it says about anything else, because they view a guy in a dress as overtly sexual.
I was just thinking that too. I mean, that says something about them because they're looking at men in a dress and getting turned on by it, right?
Right.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a you problem. Or I'm kind of it's hey man, whatever makes you happy, it's okay. I'm not going to dumb your name.
And again, very vague, unconstitutionally vague. Engaged in conduct, what conduct? You didn't talk about that. They do later in the bill, but yeah, it's designed, as Eli was saying, to criminalize people for existing. If a child observes you wearing a dress, or maybe even just, who knows, wearing a t-shirt that says gay people exist, is that conduct observed to a child that is encouraging them to be sexual? They think it is. That's the problem. It isn't.
Eli
Maybe
keeps
it's Eli.
saying good stuff. We got to get him to say
all
more.
really silly. This is all very silly, by the way. Eli, do you think this is silly? Because please say
Yeah,
it
of course it's silly.
We're
Yeah,
on the
of
wrong
course it is.
show.
That tweet from Yarosi that you read, Helen, it really just kind of gives away their intent behind it. And in the article, it even says, like, you don't need to hypothesize what this bill is about. It's pretty clear based on who the supporters of it, who the authors of it are, and like that specific language you read, cross-examiner. And just the way these politicians or these representatives are conducting themselves socially, publicly, like on social media, that makes it extremely clear what it is. And I think, Kelly, I didn't think of it before, but you mentioned that this is just so that the next election term, they can say, oh, well, I wrote this bill, I introduced this bill, what did my opponent do? Or what did, anybody else do to try to get rid of those, get rid of wokeism?
And you don't care about the children, which
No,
I
they
hate.
don't. And it can be a
I
poison.
really hate this. I'm just going to
Yep.
say this right now. I'm sick and tired of political pundits using children as like propping them up as for a win so they get votes. I think it's very gross. I don't like it. Sorry, it was just a side thing that drives me crazy. Go ahead, Eli.
I was going to add, it's also, to Eli's point, it can also be a poison pill. They may not intend for it to pass. They just want to put the bill up so they can go in front of their voters and say, I introduced a bill that would stop this drag queen nonsense, and the liberals voted against it, or it passed, but the activist judges shot it down, so we should hate the judges and we should hate the liberals, when they knew all along it was a shit bill. Yeah, that's what they do.
I don't think they care whether it passes or not.
No.
I think
they waste everybody's time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just for image.
Yep. You're right. It's just a symbol to show that, look, I'm anti-woke, just like all you people think I should be, which I'm not sure is a winning strategy to begin with anymore. It might have been for a brief moment of time, but I don't think it is anymore.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, everybody, if you want to hear more about more weird crap that's going around and what you can do about, click down here or over here, do there.